It's all about traveling, and I think a thing like the International Jazz Platform here in Łódź is just, it's creating that platform. And how, I mean, that is the big difference, is that people are coming together from a lot of different places. I mean, including the teachers and the musicians. My name is Peter Eldh. I'm originally from Sweden. I studied in Copenhagen and I live in Berlin at the moment. I've been there for the last 10 years. And I work with a lot of groups in Europe. My own projects, Coma Saxo, is a quintet that I'm leading. We're releasing on We Jazz. Another group is Enemy with Kit Downs and James Madron. We just recorded for ECM. So that's going to come out, and hopefully that's going to be a bit more busy again. I also have a project called Project Drums, where I feature a lot of different drummers. That is being released by Edition Records. I work a lot as a producer. One of those projects is Why Otis with Otis Sandsjö. And I'm also performing a lot with Speak Low with Lucia, and again Lucia Kadoc, and again Otis Sandsjö. So those are some of my projects, but yeah, that's my professional life. Like my whole experience of being at a conservatory. I mean, I studied for 5 years, bachelor and master in Copenhagen. And I was really lucky because it coincided with Django Bates being appointed professor when I think I was in my 3rd year when that happened, or maybe a 2nd year, I can't remember. But my introduction to, I knew Django's music from before, but the reason when we met for the first time, that was actually a bit similar to the International Jazz Platform. It was, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was a cooperation between some different schools in the Nordic countries. Trondheim was involved, Copenhagen was involved, the school in Gothenburg was involved, and I think Sibelius Academy in Helsinki as well. Anyway, this was a project that was taking place during the Trondheim Jazz Festival. And it was this thing of like sending a demo. So you submitted a demo and you were chosen to play Django's music with Django in a big band. And this is before he was appointed professor. But subsequently, he came to Copenhagen, and we had already met and we had already worked. So when it came to him putting together a student big band, playing his music and rehearsing his music, I was the obvious choice because he knew that I could play his music. And that's when my kind of like mentorship, I'm calling it, started with him. He became my mentor in many ways. We met every Friday with this band. And this was actually something that was scheduled outside the normal school hours. And that became my school. The rest of the school and that academic approach was not really my kind of thing. So I was just lucky that he was there, and that really became like such a learning process, playing his music in that bigger ensemble. And then, of course, he also then, a couple of years, after having been in Copenhagen a couple of years, he started his piano trio together with me and Peter Brun. And that was one of my first international bands that I started touring a lot with around Europe. And that opened so many doors. And again, it was playing Django's very challenging music was just like such an amazing school, because I learned so much. Every time he brought a new tune, it was just like a new universe and new challenges, and it's like, yeah, I kept building the knowledge about his music, but also he started informing me about ways to think about composition and other things like that. And when I'm now teaching, I mean, I'm not connected to any school, but I've been coming here before, and I've been going other places, to other conservatories, and I'm doing master classes. And it's definitely very much informed by Django's approach to compositions and so on. Go back to that meeting with Django Bass up in Trondheim. That project, that's where Gard Nilsen was the drummer in that project. So that's the first time I met Gard. I mean, so only having that meeting and us connecting then was just like, I mean, it took some years before we actually started working more regularly together, but it was just that meeting that meant so much, because it's like you made those connections to something that's outside of your circle. So it's that meeting with people coming from other countries. I think that's just essential to how this music should operate. And it's just that surfaces, contact surfaces, that are being created, that is outside of your comfort zone. Because I mean, if you study at school for 5 years, I mean, I was there for 5 years in Copenhagen, but I was actively reaching out, trying to figure out who are playing what and how and where and when, like in other countries. And I mean, coming from Sweden, I had some connections to Sweden, but then having the connection to Gard and some other people in Norway, just started reaching out. And then, of course, Django brought me to England. That's where I met Kit, because Kit came to one of the first concerts that we played with the trio in the UK. It's all about traveling, and I think a thing like the International Jazz Platform here in Łódź is just, it's creating that platform. And how, I mean, that is the big difference, is that people are coming together from a lot of different places. I mean, including the teachers and the musicians. I basically, I always do a version of the same, but it's always different, because I mean, every time I come back, I learn some new stuff, or I made some new compositions. So I often start from, the starting point is always my compositions, but rhythmical games that I picked up along the way from other people or from records. And I'm always very careful about name dropping them, because it's all about this exchange. But it's also important to remember where it came from and so on. But my method is just, it's all about rhythm, and it's very much a rhythmical approach that is far away from the academic way of teaching rhythm. So it's much more rooted in folk music, for example. And that is something that I've always found was missing in a lot of academic, what do you call the curriculum of a school or of a course. It's just that thing of like, defining things as an institution, rather than having the input from the individuals that make up the institution. I think it's important to really kind of like look at the individuals and see what they have to say. So that is an approach that is really important to me. And I mean, in a way, I'm becoming more and more. I mean, I'm anti-authoritative by nature, so schools and institutions are like, I don't fit in there really. So it's like, if someone tells me what to tell someone else, it's just like that doesn't work. I always try to underline that whatever I bring to the table, it's just like, that's just my subjective kind of idea of how important. I mean, this is what I'm doing. I'm bringing stuff that I'm actually working with, not as a teacher, but as a musician. So it's like real life examples. And then it's, I mean, that some people like it, some people don't, but that's totally fine. And it is that, I don't know, I mean, I could sometimes maybe open up a little bit more for input, but it's also, yeah, that's a balance that it's hard to gauge, I think, but yeah. Just listen to the historical stuff. I mean, and if it's jazz that you're like, it's important to kind of like know about what your motivation is to actually play music, but all, specifically jazz. I mean, also knowing the history and never forget where it comes from, and not be oblivious to the whole thing that has been created in the States. It's like that is always going to be the biggest, like the foundation of everything, and that is important to acknowledge. And just by doing that, also then being curious about your peers and young people, what emerging artists are doing, and to travel. I mean, that's easier said than done. I mean, especially now, but you know, just have an idea about that people are playing in every country. There you will find interesting people to play with, and I think that international connection is that's the best thing you can do to connect with people outside your own country.